First impressions of Modern Horizons 3.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with
Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, I'm still upset that there isn't a Magus or the Sensei stop, to be totally honest, after trying out all these MH3 cards and still have more on the way. And, all right. So let's get into it, man. What's your takes?
So, Phil, I don't think you can be that upset since you haven't even used the tools they've given you so far in the form of power balance. You confessed to me last night you have not gotten your power balances in the mail yet. The whole world is disappointed right now.
Yeah, my power balances are still in the mail, although I do think that ultimately the way that power balance is actually going to play out is not any way similarly to counterbalance. The cards that enable both cards are the same, but they are so far and away different in terms of like the behavior that they'll inform on your opponent. And that's the thing that I'm really most interested in testing. Isn't like, is power balance good enough? Is it not good enough? Like red is just so prohibitive that like it's probably just like sort of slotted into the Delver players putting the counterbalance somewhere in their 75. It's probably just better as counterbalance for the matchups that they bring it in against, because it allows them to continue to be proactive and like actually get ahead on cards. But the thing that I haven't gotten to experience yet with power balance is I know when I put a counterbalance in a play, I know how my opponents have to then behave, right? I have experience with how it changes their behavior, with how they have to navigate a game, where I don't know that with power balance yet, because they know when the power balance is in play, they may allow me to get some free stuff off, but they know that their shit's still going to resolve. Whereas with counterbalance, they don't. So their sequencing changes based on them trying to gather information on what they can get through the counterbalance and what they can't, where that's not going to be the case with power balance. So I don't actually have experience of like what it's going to do to my opponents. And that I think is the biggest knowledge gap of, what we can do in theory with power balance versus what it'll actually look like in person, outside of the fact that red is just so prohibitive.
This episode is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. Go to toamagic.com and use the code Durdles for 5% off your order. You'll be directly supporting the show, and you'll get the entire order in one package. No more waiting for several packages. That's toamagic.com, code Durdles for 5% off.
Yeah. Well, so we've got some takeaways so far from you've played in a tournament or two since the new sets come out. I've played in a few leagues, and I have some takeaways as well. So you 3-0-1 with Miracles the other night.
Yeah, I've been on a pretty good run with Miracles the last couple of outings that I've had with it since I've added Brainsurge to the mix. Now, I don't know if that's actually because like Brainsurge is this huge level up. Like, don't get me wrong, like Brainsurge is doing exactly what I thought it would do. There's no surprises. The card's obviously good, and it's greasing the wheels in a way that's like really nice. Having a proactive 3-drop to pair with counterbalance for like the stuff that I like to do. Making sure that your Miracles are obviously more online. It sort of takes the tension off of just Brainstorms, because now you just have a higher density of Brainstorms in your deck. So now not only before your Brainstorms were both enablers and a way to fix your hands for the matchups that you're in, having more Brainstorms just naturally like alleviates the pressure that's on Brainstorm, the card itself. So it's doing all those things that I remember I learned when I was testing out Dream Cache, and and Brainsurge is obviously a better Dream Cache, but it's showing me all of the same effects. And then the plus side is that, okay, got a little bit of power creep. Now there's some card advantage like baked in. It's not solving any of the problems that the deck otherwise has. It's just sort of greasing the wheels and like turning it up a notch in terms of its efficiency and like how consistent it can actually be. And there's a couple of games now on 90s MTG if anybody wants to see it in action. It's good. It's not like changing the paradigms in any way. My last couple of outings I've done really well, but I don't know if that's because the Brainsurge is just this nice level up for the way that I like to pilot my style of Miracles, or if it's because I'm playing against decks that are otherwise more untuned or less refined because people are trying MH3 cards. And we talked about that, right? People are going to go into the lab, experiment with some stuff. They might be playing subpar lists, and I don't know if it's a result of that. And Miracles has always been very good at beating up on like the weird janky stuff that doesn't all come together, because if it needs to be picked apart, counterbalance and removal are really good at like picking apart those sort of synergies when you need your opponent to cooperate around stuff. If you give me time, like I'm always going to do well if I have mana and cards to like maneuver around things. Like that's the whole function of the deck. One thing that I've learned though, with that I'm going to try and I'm trying to solve right now is I feel like prismatic ending is still a necessity for a lot of control decks. If you're not playing exactly the like shitty beanstalk piles where you can get access to leyline binding. Hey, yeah, you know, you'll get into that. Without being able to play a bad mana base to get leyline binding into the mix, I feel like prismatic ending to get around stuff that isn't creatures is sort of a necessity, and that sort of requires a third color splash, and like that makes your mana worse. And I find that my weakness is any deck that's attacking the mana in any way, whether it's recurring wasteland or just like anything that goes after my mana becomes really hard, because I'm a Mystic Sanctuary deck, and so I need to like get through that. So I need to like get to a certain threshold of mana, and if that's the axis that we're fighting on, I always have a rough time. So it'd be really nice to be able to get rid of the splash. So I have to test out things like Static Prison and stuff like that to get forward. But yeah, where you at?
I played a couple of leagues with my Draco Bean-packed control deck that I've been sort of championing over the last few weeks. Jumping off here and there to play like Infect and stuff like that. But I went through I want to say 3 leagues on Magic Online. You know, we've got that creator account now. You can follow Twitch TV at Durdle Magus or whatever. That link's somewhere down there. And you can see when I go live. But I say all that to say this: I had a lot of success with the deck. I think I did I had one that was like 2-3, which was not great, but I was kind of just tinkering around. But then I had a 4-1 and a 3-2, and the 3-2 could have easily been another 4-1 had I just played a little tighter. But I think the thing that you were kind of pointing out is that like when a format is new and people are, for lack of a better term, fucking around and finding out, they find out pretty quickly that like a pretty tuned control list that has a wide swath of answers can just punt their game right out of the field. And that's sort of what I came to learn when I was playing my 4-1, is that like I played against some sort of like back to basics like style deck, which it could have game against me, but like I just have leyline binding, and I have Leyline of the Guild Pact as well to like make my my mana base like okay. If I just fetch the 2 basics I have in the deck, I'm probably gonna be fine because most of the deck runs off of 2 mana. Draco costs 12, but he really costs 2. Almost everything else in the deck, the Territorial Kavu still has domain, like all these things. As long as I have the Bean Pact in play, or the Guild Pact in play, the deck seems to run fine. And if I have to answer a leyline, and that's the other thing, is like I was able to just make my opponent think that like they wanted to put in the back to basics against me, which like I was fine with them like going okay, like I just have to slam it, and then I was like okay, well you just wasted 3 mana and a card against me, and I already have a Draco on the board. All I have to do is untap and attack with the Goblin Bombardiers, and you're dead. And so that happened more. That happened more this in this 4-1 than I think I've ever done the like Draco into Bombardiers. I win. I played against Tony Scapone, a friend of the show. He was on the Necrodominance, like turn 1, like just get you with Born Upon a Wind deck, which I was telling Phil, we were wrong about Necropotence. If this deck, even if it's a glass cannon style deck, and let's say it's fine, they leave Necrodominance alone because like the deck's gonna have like kind of a wonky win rate. I think. That's not fun. Like, it's good, but that's not what I want to have to deal with at every like Magic tournament playing against Oops All Spells all day. So I think, you know, I'll go on record and say we were wrong about Necropotence being okay for the format. But I think Necrodominance, again, like, it's fine. It's not like creating any interesting play space, which I think is what you had said about it. Is like, this deck this card is either going to be a 0 or a 60, and it's not going to do anything interesting if it's a 60. So
there's a bunch of cards that are like that, where it's like pretty obvious that, like, if you're maximizing it, then you're maximizing it in a way that's extremely uninteresting for anybody other than the exact person playing it. And like, the games are not necessarily going to be all that replayable because it's just trying to do the exact same thing every time. And the optimal way to build any kind of list that's using cards like that is to just make sure that you do the exact same thing every single time as consistently as possible. And so that just makes for like really uninteresting or unreplayable games. But it might be good enough to just like spike an event, right? Like, we've seen Oops All Spells like top 8 events when people are just like unprepared or not respecting it. And in this case, if you're playing against Necro, I haven't gotten an opportunity to get enough reps against it to know what you exactly need. But I would imagine that some amount of it is just like having instant speed disenchants. You're playing Leyline Bindings, but do you get enough time to actually get there? You know, it's like, okay, well, we're either on Force of Vigors or we're on, you know, some amount of like 1-mana disenchant style effects. And, you know, there's a smattering of that, but if people have to start respecting it in that way, okay, you know, like, that's it. It's sort of looks like, again, like, you sort of mull into your hand, and then I try and find the hate, and we're just sort of, you know, opening our 7s and using the London mulls until we line our hands up and hope that it's interesting, which it never is. So it's like, it may not be too powerful, it may be too powerful, but whatever. It's like, the games are always like, I think, like, if I would recommend that anybody do like sort of the headspace that we're in, where it's like, just desensitize yourself to those games. You know, like, if you get paired against those decks, it's just rolling dice, right? Like, you can be as prepared as possible, but if you lose the die roll and they just shit on you anyway, even if you opened your answer, it's like, the only real thing is exactly Force of Vigor or bust. And if you're not in enough green, then
so Phil, what's funny is, so I won a game against that. I won a match against that deck, and I lost a match against that deck. I ended up playing Max Torsion in the last round for me, and he ended up beating me. And what you said was totally true. He did the thing two games in a row and got me. And I even had Force, Guild Pact, and Force of Vigor. So I had to choose between which one I could do. And he started off with a Bobble. And I was just like, well, I guess, like, if he has it, I lose, you know? And he did. So there's that. But when I was playing against Tony, I had an answer each time for his Necrodominance. And that match lasted, honestly, I don't think that match lasted more than 3 minutes. Tony did his thing, I countered it. Tony did his thing, I cast Leyline Binding. Game over. Like, match over. Like, it just ended immediately.
And that is, like, I am not surprised in the slightest that that's what the experience was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the deck is designed to open its hand, show it to you, is this good enough? And then you're like, well, it depends. Does it line up against exactly what I drew? And if it does, game over. And if it doesn't, game over the other way. And that's it. And
it's a deck that asks the question, do you like to eat between rounds?
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Well, the entire game is designed that entire experience is built only around the person who's building the Necrodominance deck to see if they can be consistent enough to actually build it in such a way where they can just do that same thing over and over and over again for a large enough tournament to spike it. And so it's like, okay, well, at that point, the games are over by the time you sit down at the table, right? You just open your hands and lay them out and then line up cards. And it's, you know, I think that, like, even with the experimentation of all that stuff, like, my experience so far with MH3, which is, I know, what we wanted to, like, hop into this episode about. From my experience so far, I mean, granted, it's limited because MH3 has only been out for so long, but what I have gathered so far is people are in the lab and they're experimenting with a bunch of stuff, which is great, cool. Like, let's experiment with new toys, lovely. But I do think that, like, once the dust settles and people have sort of, like, gotten their itch of trying out what's going to be good, okay, Necrodominance is this new Belcher deck, whatever. But outside of that, I think once the dust settles, everybody's going to realize, okay, there's still like these unbelievable power outliers that MH3 isn't going to correct for, and those things are exactly grief plus whatever, where everything is free and overpowered, and strips the hands down to nothing, and again, it's just you line up your hands and hope it's good enough. And then the other power outlier is obviously Beanstalk, and then the layer right above that on the power outlier scale is like anything Urza Saga. So I think once the dust settles, people will just return to those power outliers, and then we're going to see like the exact same decks doing well at big events. I know we have Baltimore coming up in July is like the next major event it's a 5K, so it's not like the biggest thing in the world, but I intend to go to that. But I expect that the top tables will just continue to be grief scam decks and maybe Beanstalk if it shows up, and then some amount of combo based on like what people are prepared for and what they're not. But I don't expect there to be any like major changes outside of like when we do the Assassin's Creed previews and see if there's anything there. But
I disagree with you in that I think we're going to see that Nadu deck taking over.
Sure.
Because that is the one deck. So my current, I think I'm in a league right now and I'm like 3-1, and my one loss was like just a runaway victory where like I beat game 1, and then game 2 and 3 were like I couldn't answer a core whatever nomads in core with Nadu on the board, and the dude just ran away with the deck. And so I let the second game I let him just like do the thing because I'm recording it to get some content anyhow, and it just drew the whole deck and then played Thassa's Oracle. So
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, I think the Nadu, like the fair Nadu decks, are eventually just going to get sifted out of the meta, because like if you're the same thing with Necrodominance of like people talking about putting it in fair decks versus optimizing the like actual best way to do it, and it's like I think the actual best way to do Nadu is just being breakfast, right? Like it's just a better like breakfast got a new tool, and if you're not doing something akin to breakfast, a la with nomads and Thassa's Oracle or whatever, where you can draw your deck and just proactively do it that way, I feel like you're probably undercutting yourself and you're just a worse version of something else. So I agree, Nadu's definitely the truth, but I imagine that it's the truth in a combo shell, not in one of those fair decks that's like make a bunch of things pass the turn with a bunch of counter spells or whatever.
To give folks who haven't seen it a quick synopsis of what that deck does, on like a more than just like it draws the whole deck and plays the card. The deck also runs Dryad Arbor, which works really well with it because it's like, I'll reveal Dryad Arbor, boop, it's down there. I get to do this 2 more times to the Dryad Arbor. Look, another Dryad Arbor, boop, boop. Cool. And Nomads in core, I'll target that a couple times. Like, it gets to the point where it just gets enough stuff onto the board, and it can pass turn and be like, I can block whatever's going on, if I have to. And then they're playing Solvin Safekeeper to like protect the Nadu as well. They're playing Green Sun Zenith. Like, the whole deck works pretty much in concert with itself. But the thing that I didn't want to scoop until I saw like what it was actually doing. And the thing that I was like, okay, this is the powerful thing that it's doing, aside from Nadu obviously being powerful, is that free creature that is the Dryad Arbor sort of bridges the gap of like having to cast like creatures like 4, 5, and 6 to get the rest of your deck drawn. So that to me is the thing that like if there's a way to figure that out, like we talked about you and I talked about Steely Resolve, which is it gives all creatures of a certain type Shroud for 2 mana. It's also like a $15 card, so it's like, do you really want to experiment with a card that's like, I'll name wizards, I guess, and then it's like they still get to go off.
You're probably better just playing like anything that turns off artifact activations. No rods and shit.
Yeah, like I think the Disruptor Flute and Pithing Needle are probably the best ways to stop that deck. Because then you could just be like, okay, like Nomads in core, like, and then like, okay, and then I'll say Shuko, and then that's their 2 things that they're gonna use. I haven't seen anybody try and cast Seeking's Blessing, and I think that's a little too cute. Or the other one.
That those kinds of cards always like people will experiment with it one time, then they'll draw it when they don't have the rest of the combo on the table in a position that they would otherwise already be winning, and then they're like, well, this fucking sucks, and then they just get rid of it. Like that's always what happens with those kinds of cards. They don't do anything if you're not already winning.
I will say this: the reason why those are popping up, those 2 legends things, like target all creatures, they become green; target all creatures, they become blue, is because of CEDH, which is there's a little bit more opportunity there to like mess around with your bad cards. But the other takeaway I had from the 4-1 was like I said, I played a super fair deck. I played two very unfair decks, and then I played I want to say I played one Nadu deck in that 4-1 and just got there. And then the big difference was that I didn't actually play any new cards in my deck for the 4-1. I have switched up now, and I'm playing. I took out Sticker Goblin's gone, right? So we don't need Blue Elemental Blast in our deck anymore, like in our sideboard. We don't need it, as an answer to.
I still play one as a hedge against like Magus and Blood Moon because with Lorien Revealed, you kind of like if you have one, then you sort of always have access to your island. So I still play one as a hedge, but I can understand why people would move away from it right now.
What I'm getting at is like you can skew away from. You have a couple sideboard slots open because we're not dealing with goblins anymore, right? So I took out I was running a Meltdown in the sideboard as well. So I took those two cards out, the Blue Blast and Meltdown, and put into Wrath of the Skies. And let me tell you, that card has been overperforming. I actually have the deck that I have right now. I took out 2 Orcish Bowmasters. I was running 4 because all you need right now is the threat of Orcish Bowmasters. People know to play around it. So if you aren't playing a bad card against bad matchups where it is just to raise the alarm against some matchups, but against the good matchups, they're aware that like you have a Bowmasters, maybe they saw it in the previous turn, or maybe they're just, it's not banned, so they just know you're playing it, right? And you get to play 1 or 2 other cards while still being able to threaten that Bowmasters occasionally. I put in a Wrath of the Skies for one, which has been just one main deck, like just a board wipe that like it gets enchantments, artifacts, and creatures. And there are times where you're just like, are you a Nadu deck? That's a shame. I guess I'll just wrath your entire board, dummy. Or I also put in one Territorial Kavu as like a third beater because I was playing 2 before, and that card is absurd when you get it down. A 5/5 that gets to just like pick off a card in the graveyard or loot you just to like see more stuff. 5/5 by itself is just fine for 2 mana. Like that's a Tarmogoyf, right? Like basically. But with the Draco out and the Guild Pact, you're looking at like a 5/5 first strike, lifelink, trample, hexproof. Did I miss something?
Whatever. All the
vigilance.
Things,
there you go. And that those two together are super dumb. And it just makes it so that your opponent has to deal with like every card in this deck that's not Force of Will is a friggin' problem for your opponent. Like even if you just like, I need to see some more cards and I've got 2 Beanstalks out, I guess I'll just Leyline Binding this inconsequential thing to just like throw some velocity out there. The deck, the deck's big problem right now, I still think is the mana base. I'm playing like a one of Xander's Lounge to like make up for the amount of red you need to like get Bombardiers off. Bombardiers might be too cute right now too, but against some decks you're just like turn 3 you lose, and that's good. This is always the kind of control player I am. I like to have an I win button in my control deck, which is it's odd that I've never played Breakfast because I think Breakfast is that realm that I love to live in other formats. Being like the gift ungiven player that like goes, I got the Kiki Jiki combo on turn 5, idiot, like you tapped out, dummy. So yeah, I where the format is right now, I think be prepared for Nadu for sure. But you don't necessarily need a ton of new cards to compete right now, which is not the case. I think when Lord of the Rings came out a year ago.
Yeah, I'm going to be treating everything as though that like I'm assuming the position that by the time we get to the major tournaments coming up in a month, that the format will have sort of figured itself out of like what new cards are playable and which ones aren't. There will be these upgrades like you were talking about with Nadu, but ultimately it's going to fall back on there's a couple of new combo enablers between Necrodominance and Nadu, and then the rest of it is just going to fall back to the power outliers that are like clearly head and shoulders above the rest of the format. And like those things are still going to continue to be problems, and as long as those are part of it, like I would urge everybody to be sort of clear-eyed about those things, because like at the end of the day, the power outliers are the things that are going to bury you more so than anything else. Even if it's not as flashy because we're so accustomed to it, but it's like, just scam you, the game is over, or a beanstalk and play bury you under a bunch of cards. Like, there's so many other fireworks that go on around that shit, but like the power outliers are the things that are actually beating you on the table, and like just having a plan or a way to contend against those things, if there even is just going to be so crucial for like the difference between you giving up your additional losses that you just can't afford in a actual paper event.
So, and the other deck that I played against, now that I remember, and another deck that I think is a true contender for tournament play, is 12 Post. With that, what is that card? Mycosynth, whatever the hell, Sowing Myco Spawn. So that card is quite good, especially if you're playing against a deck like mine that like needs its lands, right? But that I got lucky against that deck in the 4-1 where they kept drawing like planar nexuses, but not the cards to pay off their planar nexuses, and then they didn't get there. But that deck, given enough time, especially against a deck like yours or mine that doesn't have the speed that other decks do, or the disruption against like an Eldrazi, that deck can be quite competitive and quite good. And like I said, that's one I think you should watch out for. Be ready in your sideboards, I should say, for ways to deal with a deck like that, because that's not one that we've been used to seeing for a long time.
100%. 12 Post got a huge amount of upgrades. I don't know if the community that like revolves around the theory of that deck has like come to a consensus of what the optimal build is with all of these new tools that they have access to, because it hasn't had a lot of time to like test all those things. I incidentally right now am on going back and forth between 3 and 4 consigned to memory, because we've talked before about like what I have problems with, which is if an initiative creature touches the battlefield, I just scoop, right? Like, I'm just not interested in playing against initiative. I still think like it's an abomination that it's in the format, but if it ever touches the table, I'm just like, okay, I'm 0% to win the game. I just waste no time. I'm desensitized to it. The second initiative is introduced, I just scoop it up and go to the next game.
We saw that in your game against Chris Benucci on 90s MTG.
It's just it's just like it's like, okay, this is like obviously a broken thing that I wish they had removed alongside getting rid of attractions and stickers. Like, I wish they also just removed initiative, because it's just like, so it's just such an egregious error in my mind, particularly since like we have Aaron Forsyth on camera saying that it was a mistake.
Your question.
Like the fact that we have them literally saying that this was a mistake and shouldn't have been this way, like, and then they left it when they could have removed it as a blanket swath of like these ancillary things. Like, the fact that they didn't pull the trigger on that, like, I don't quite understand. But I'm now playing a bunch of consigned to memories because to try and solve specifically that kind of problem, which is a big issue. But also, consigned to memory is going to have some crossover into the 12 Post matchup. I don't think it's going to be enough to like solve those problems, but at least it's a way to like solve both. Like, it's for 2 mana, it solves both the cast and the
If someone Mycosynth with kickers you can pay 2 mana and be like, no.
You can just replicate both the cast and then get rid of the creature. And then even if you don't get rid of the creature, even just like having a counterspell for the cast trigger is really valuable. Now, granted, like, you're going down a card,
the vexing baubles that they're playing too.
Yeah, so like we'll see how that lines up. I just don't think that one tool is enough to stop a deck that's like just entirely built around doing the exact same thing like that. Yeah. But at least there's something there. I haven't played against 12 Post yet, but it's always been a notoriously bad matchup for control. Like, if I ever run into it, I assume that I'm a buy for them, which is really unfortunate. But there is like Harbinger of the Seas and stuff like that. But like, all of our control lists that we've talked about, and the way that the speed of the format is sort of like, it's really hard to play any like land-based hate that isn't if you're not Stompy in the Blood Moon space, or if you're not just playing some amount of Wastelands. It's really hard to do anything like Back to Basics. I don't think is playable. It's just way too slow, and the constraints that you have to put on your own mana to get underneath it means that you're also slower, and then just get punished by the speed of the format, particularly if you're playing a 3-mana enchantment where like if it doesn't line up against the matchup, then you can't really main board it, right? So you have to play it in the board. But then even if you play it in the board, there are so many tools to get rid of something like that, between like Besage You and Red Blast and like a bunch of other things. And then
it just feels
I
like a
Harbinger
mana
this
too
season
much
similar.
to work in this format right now too.
It used to be fine. Nowadays it would probably have to be like 1 in a blue and have some sort of protection clause on it,
and draw a
which
card.
is just crazy. You know, like it's just some kind of absurd design that could never see like print reasonably. So that sort of thing is off the table. But also, like, I think that the speed of the format compels you to have to, like, you know, lean harder into a dirtier mana base, so to speak. And
what would that card be called, Phil? Make basics great again?
No, yeah. Who the fuck knows? I don't know shit.
Yeah.
But like, if we were to summarize like where we're at now, I think it'll be interesting to like do another check-in on MH3 in a couple of weeks. But right now, I don't see it overhauling anything beyond what the top power outliers are already in the format. If like, outside of Nadu, like extending breakfast and making that really powerful, I haven't seen anything out of MH3 that has sort of convinced me that the power outliers that currently loom over the format have been challenged in any way.
Yeah,
you know, maybe there's some upgrades with like the frog, like second frog being put into scam. Like maybe there's a little upgrade there.
Necrodominance is a new blast cannon. Seeing that in Delver as well.
Yeah. Like there's like some minor upgrades or whatever, but the power outliers to me are still the same. And so like the top tables will just continue to be those power outliers. So you'll have some amount of Delver, you'll have some amount of scam, you'll have some amount of Beanstalk, and then anything else will be Urza Saga based, and then that's sort of it. Yeah. And like maybe a breakfast deck can show up if people aren't respecting it, and which, you know, is partially also just an Urza Saga build. So like you're looking at these pillars that have not been challenged in any way to me, and I mean that's where I sit with MH3 right now.
I'll say this from what I've seen online, I'm not seeing as many scam decks, and I don't know if that's because people are going, I'm gonna find out about this format. Yeah. You know, I'm experimenting. I don't want to play the same boring deck I've been playing for months. You know, also, I think like, that's part of it.
Yeah, scam is boring. Like to play scam is boring, right? Yeah. Like it's not a replayable thing. Like you open your hand, you grief each other, like everything's down to 0. You're top decking the first 2 turns. If the game isn't over, then you're just top decking and hope you top deck better. Like it's just they're not like grief does not make for interesting games.
I'll say
like,
this,
for either player. Like so,
I played against Sahar on when we had the creator like early access, and I built the scam deck with psychic frogs, and the deck felt. I mean, I won. You know, like the deck felt fine. I didn't need the psychic frogs to just like turn to play Atraxa. Atraxa's still good. You know, like so. I don't think that goes away. If everything stays the way it is, I do still very much think that they need to get rid of grief. I'm on the fence about Orcish Bowmasters, but I'm leaning more towards get rid of Orcish Bowmasters. I'm just sick of seeing it. But because the Nadu deck doesn't draw cards, and that's a powerful deck, that might be the thing that makes it like, if that saturation pulls over, that might make Bowmasters like just a fine thing that like exists in the format. If people are doing things that draw cards but aren't actually drawing cards.
Turns out they like have to have they now are designing things specifically with Bowmasters in mind, which, you know, I think is an unhealthy place for design to be, to have to constantly think about like this one thing that otherwise just punishes whatever else you're doing. So you have to consciously design around the cards.
Just like, everything's a squire, like, nothing draws cards, but it puts them into your hand.
Like, it's like, okay, if you have to like do all of this templating around to get like around this problem that you otherwise could just go like whatever, but like at least like it costs mana, and like Bowmasters can win a game by itself, but at least like there is play to it a little bit. Like it's I don't know, the fact that there's more play to it than if a Beanstalk buries you, or if a grief like just strips the game down to nothing for, you know, effectively nothing. I mean,
I will say,
I think I also would be totally fine with both grief and Bowmasters going, but I think like grief leads to worse play patterns because it just exacerbates the die roll so hard that like I'd be happy to see that go and then see where things shake out. I mean, that opens up a bunch of slots for those decks that they just probably like. I've seen like the scam meta sort of like cannibalized itself to a degree, so people started moving away from Bowmasters because
they're just less playing like main deck Dothy Voidwalker now.
They just moved into Dothy Voidwalkers. But if you got rid of the griefs, I wonder if that like also changes how many reanimates that you play, or like reanimation effects that you play. But then it just also opens the slot for the Bowmasters to come right back in. So like maybe you're on this sort of like
frog, like
Psychic Frog, you know? You're on this sort of like, you know, scammy mid-range thing. But I imagine that the deck plays out very much differently if you can't just like open your hand, forcibly mind twist you and then play from nothing. Like games probably are just a lot different, and I think it would be at least interesting to see how it shakes out from there rather than make multiple bans. But at the same time, there's a lot of cards that I don't find to be interesting gameplay. So it would be okay. But yeah, I mean, I hope that by the next time we talk about MH3 that we see a little bit more exploration, and then something is uncovered, because the set is deep, and I feel like there just hasn't been enough time because the obvious things have sort of floated to the top. But I expect there to be enough exploration by the next time we talk about it that there will be more interesting things to talk about with the set that hopefully makes it so that the power outliers are challenged in some way, and we can get a reasonable shakeup that's not just the experimentation phase.
Yeah, I think we'll need to see the first big tournament, beyond challenges, before we see somebody throw something out that it challenges what we know about the format. Right now, people are messing around, and they're also playing their darlings still. So I think when money's on the line and it comes down to who has innovated, I'm sure Brian Koval will point us in the correct direction. Honestly, but I think that's a great way to end the episode. So thanks everyone for watching. If you get a chance, please subscribe, all that stuff. We only have 22% of you that watch our videos are subscribed. So let's pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. And if you can support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/EternalDurdles. We would really appreciate if you could do that. And with that said, see you next week. Later on, Phil.
Later on.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/EternalDurdles. Thanks so much for watching.